Hello dear students, welcome back to the second session of the poem An Old Woman. In the previous session, we discussed the first three stanzas of the poem, that means the first three triplets of the poem. As I already told you in my previous session, there is an indefinite article in the title of the poem, An Old Woman. So we do not know who is this woman, but by the time we end the poem, by the time we complete the poem, this woman would become very familiar to all of us, and this particular woman would teach a great lesson to all of us to our life. Now, as we already discussed in the previous session, for the development of thought in the poem has been divided into 11 triplets, that means 11 three-line stanzas. So the first part of the poem, the first half of the poem, that means the first 5 triplets of the poem talks about the indifference, the apathy and the irritation felt by the poet at the constant nagging of this old woman. The poet thinks of her as a pest. Someone needs to be brushed off or someone needs to be get rid of. But the sixth triplet or the sixth stanza of this poem, where the attitude of the poet changes towards that old woman. He sees things in a different light altogether. He looks at her very closely and he could see her suffering, pain and struggle, and moreover he could see her determination and self-respect. So all these things make him feel very small in front of her. So the last 5 triplets of the poem are an expression of the change in perception of the poet towards this old woman. So the importance of this change in perception of the poet is underlined by the change in the language of the poem that we will discuss as we proceed with this poem. So the first 3 stanzas of this poem talks about the indifference, the apathy and the irritation felt by the poet at the constant nagging of this old woman. And this indifference, irritation and apathy continue in the next 2 stanzas as well. Now let us move on to the 4th stanza of the poem. Let us read and understand the 4th stanza of the poem. The poet says, "She won't let you go. You know how old women are? They stick to you like a burr." So here you can see the poet's indifference, the irritation and the apathy continues here. Though the poet is not interested to visit that place, to visit the horseshoe shrine, since he had already seen it many a time, since he is a Maharashtrian, the native of that place, he might have seen that place every now and then. Since the poet is not interested to visit the horseshoe shrine, the old woman is not ready to leave him. She doesn't want the poet to go on his way. And that is why he says, she won't let you go. It shows how adamant she is. It shows how persistent she is. Adamant in the sense, the old woman doesn't want the poet to go on his way without fulfilling her demand. And then he says, you know how old women are? They stick to you like a burr. Here, you refers to the readers. And here the poet wants us to realize the situation as we have old women at our houses. Now, I am sure all of you are very familiar with the stubborn, the adamant attitude of old women. Especially if we have old women at our houses, we know how they talk, how they speak, how adamant they are, how they show their stubborn behavior. They easily won't agree with anything. So they stick to you very closely. They keep on saying the same thing. So sometimes it irritates us. So that is what the poet says. So when he says, you know how old women are, here he has used the plural noun women, not woman. So this woman refers to all the old women in general, not this particular woman of this poem. So he says, they stick to you like a burr. That means he says all old women are same. They have the same attitude. They are so adamant, they are so persistent, they are so stubborn in their behavior, and they don't want to listen to anyone. So here, through this particular character, an old woman in this poem, he wanted to say that all old women are same. So he says, they stick to you like a bird. Here they refers to all old women, like we have old women at our houses. Now the poet is making a comparison here. He compares an old woman to a bird. The old woman clings or sticks to the poet like a bird. Here burr means, the word burr means a prickly seed pod that sticks to your clothes. It can easily catch on the fur of clothes. It is actually a sticky plant usually seen in paddy fields. You can see the actual images of burr here. I have collected some pictures for you. You can see the actual image of burr on the screen. Now the comparison is made to prove that the old woman is not ready to leave the poet. Through this character, he wanted to say that all the other old women have the same character. So the old woman is not ready to leave the poet. She doesn't want the poet to go on his way without fulfilling her demand. So what is her demand? And she says that she would take him to the horseshoe shrine. For that she is asking 50 paisa coin. Here in these lines, the simile of burr makes us to think of something stuck to our clothes that we can't easily get rid of. Here the poet's embarrassment and annoyance are clear. Because despite all his efforts, the old woman is not ready to leave the poet, but she sticks to him like a burr. Now let us move on to the fifth stanza of the poem. Let us read and understand it. He says, you turn around and face her with an air of finality. You want to end the farce. The embarrassment and annoyance felt by the poet continues here. The poet is annoyed by this old woman. He is aloof, distant, and thinks of her as a pest. Someone needs to be get rid of, or someone needs to be brushed off. So he says, you turn around and face her. Why you turn around? Because you are afraid of the people, how they look at you when an old woman constantly comes behind you. So in order to escape, in order to avoid this embarrassing situation, the poet turns around and face her. The poet turns around and give her a harsh look. So how he turns around and face her? With an air of finality. So what does this mean? So what is the meaning of with an air of finality? See, the poet has already decided that I should scold this woman and send her away. Enough is enough. How much can I tolerate? And then he says, you want to end the farce. So here the word farce means a comic dramatic act that is taking place. The joke that is happening. So what is that? The poet is not ready to visit the place, the horseshoe shrine, but the old woman is not ready to leave him. She doesn't want the poet to go on his way without fulfilling her demand. So the poet gets angry. He wants to put an end to this dramatic act that is taking place. So he turns around and faces her with an air of finality. Air of finality means that he wants to put an end to this dramatic act. So he says, you want to end the farce. Farce means a comic dramatic act. So you want to put an end to all her nagging. So the first 5 triplets of the poem, the first half of the poem shows or talks about the indifference, the apathy and the irritation felt by the poet at the constant nagging of this old woman. And in all these 5 triplets, Arun Kolatkar uses repetition to convey perseverance, the stubborn attitude, the adamant attitude of this old woman, and he also uses repetitions in this first 5 triplets of the poem to convey the irritation felt by the poet. He uses repetitions like she wants, she says, she hobbles, she won't, and he also uses repetitions like you have seen, you know, you turn, you want. He uses all these repetitions to convey the irritation felt by the poet at the constant nagging of this old woman. And the language in the first half of the poem is repetitive, like the old woman's action in this first half of the poem. And the repetition creates a kind of aversion, and it creates a bored, tired and uninspired tone. But when you come to the sixth couplet of the poem, or the sixth stanza of the poem, where you can see the poet's attitude towards that old woman changes. As I already told you, he sees things in a different light altogether. He looks at her very closely, and he could see her suffering, pain, struggle, and moreover he could see the determination that she had, and he could also see her self-respect. So all these things make him feel very small before her. So the second half of the poem are an expression of the change in perception of the poem. Now let us move on to the second half of the poem, where you can see the attitude of the poet changes towards this old woman. Now let us read the sixth stanza of the poem and understand it. When you hear her say, what else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these? As I already told you, in the sixth stanza of the poem, the attitude of the poet changes towards this old woman. He looks at her very closely. So the question is, what made him to look at her very closely? It is the words of this old woman. So the moment of transformation comes when he hears the words of this old woman. So what she says, what else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these? See, I have already told you, this particular pilgrim center, the horseshoe shrine, is situated on the top of a mountain or on a hill. So the moment the poet wants to end this farce, so what he wants to do? He says, you turn around and face her with an air of finality, and you want to end the farce. So the moment the poet turns around and face her with an air of finality, because the poet wanted to put full stop to all the dramatic thing which is happening. When you give her a harsh look, when he was about to scold her, and when he turns around and face her with an air of finality, and he saw her, and the old woman reacts. These words of old woman triggers a sense of transformation in him. Earlier, she kept on telling only one thing. What is that? Allow me to take you to the horseshoe shrine, and for that you have to pay me 50 paisa coin. But now, when the poet wants to put full stop to all these things, when the poet wants to get rid of her, so what she is saying, what else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these? Now I have already told you, this place, this shrine, Jejuri, the horseshoe shrine or Kandoba temple, is a very famous holy shrine. People used to go there with all sufferings and worries, thinking that the particular god who is worshipped there would take away all their worries and sufferings, and he would give them a happy life. But why she calls this place as wretched as these? On a particular top of the mountain, this horseshoe shrine is built, and she calls all the hills around her as wretched ones, the lifeless mountains. So why she calls all these mountains are wretched? A kind of satirical statement from this old woman. You see, so many tourist people will come, so many devotees will come, but nobody is there to take care of her. So many people come there to see God, thinking that the God who is worshipped there would take away all their sufferings and worries and give them a peaceful life. But nobody is there to take care of her. Everybody wants to end the farce. Everybody wants to get rid of her. And the God is so close by, but she finds no meaning in her life. But this particular woman was there since so many years, but still she is not able to find her own life. She is the destitute. She is the woman who is thrown out of the society. She is an unwanted person to everyone. So she calls the mountains as wretched mountains, lifeless mountains where there is no humanity, but only God is there. So we need to think about her faith here. And we should also think about, we do so many meaningless things in our life. In the name of God, there are so many things happening in and around us. Many times we run miles together and we go distance following to see God in a particular pilgrim center with the belief that if we go and see the God will heal us. The God will take away all our sins. So we go with the sense of confession. So we think that if we go to a particular pilgrim center, we go to a distant place and see the God there, the God will take away all our sufferings and worries. But we forget the man who is in need in our next door. That is the meaning that she is expressing in these two lines. She says, what else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these? Here, wretched means lifeless, unpleasant, dejected, or very poor quality. She calls the mountains there, the hills there, as wretched, lifeless mountains because there is no humanity on those mountains. And she says, what is that? Why do you want to get rid of me? This is the only way I can survive here. Probably she may not be having anyone in her life. Everybody in her family must have left her. Even there are people her, they probably left her alone. And she says, what can I do? Can I work like a laborer? I cannot walk like a laborer, but I can do only one thing, that I will take you to the horseshoe shrine and I will tell you the story behind this horseshoe shrine. I am ready to take the people to the horseshoe shrine and I can be a tourist guide so that I can earn my daily bread. So one thing we should observe here, she could have begged for that 50 paisa, but she didn't do that. So she means to say that I don't want to beg and earn. I don't want to beg for money. So I don't want to get into any other activities. She means to say that I want to earn my daily bread in the sweat of my hard labor. But I'm unable to walk like a laborer. Only one thing I can do. So I can take people to the horseshoe shrine and tell the story behind this horseshoe shrine. So she says, why do you want to get rid of me? What is the other way of earning my daily bread here? So that is why she says, what else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these? Dear students, you can see in the second half of the poem, there is a kind of transformation in the poet. So he tries to look at her very closely. He could see her suffering, pain, the reason for her stay there. So as I already told you, the poet's attitude towards her slowly changes from this stanza. So dear students, let me conclude my session here. And in the next session, we will see how this old woman would teach a great lesson to all of us, to our lives. So dear students, let me conclude my session here. I'll see you in my next video. Thank you.